Welcome to the Focused Fundraiser. This is where I get to discuss how to focus on the right fundraising practices with those who are in the trenches, who have done this work over the years. And something what we believe is that doing more shouldn't be your goal. Focusing on what matters most should be. And so that's what this conversation is about, is how do we focus on the right things? My guest today is Sami Zoss, who has years of experience in the fundraising fields and in organizational operations. So Sami works on the part of fundraising that nobody puts on their conference flyer. It's the systems, it's the data and the back end, it's the operations that actually keep your organization alive and sustainable. So it's so important for us to talk about this. So Sami, welcome. Start us off by sharing a bit about yourself
Yeah.
and your nonprofit path. How you got into the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I definitely like to just I do the nerdy part of nonprofit and I love it so much. So, my license plate literally just says ops nerd on it. Because if you're gonna lean into something, you've got to lean into it all of the way, you know? So no, it is wonderful to be here. Like Rob said, I am Sami Zoss. I haven't landed on a title. I started my own business called Zoss Collaborations. It's a mix between tactical and consulting, and so I try to implement some of the work that I've done in nonprofit. I my bucket's filled when I can be in the trenches with people, so it's not necessarily just a consulting gig. Um, but before I did that, I actually was in higher ed foundation work at 3 different institutions across the nation, for over a decade or so. And so I started kind of as the little we knew we needed somebody, but we didn't quite know what we needed. And mind you, I'm a criminal justice major from small town South Dakota. So like if you get nothing else from this, like I have no business being the nerd that I am in the sections that I am. You can do it. You just got to be curious and you've got to be like determined and a little scrappy, right? So, and honestly, that's if I could describe my career in higher ed, that was really what it was. I mean, I went from being an engagement coordinator at my alma mater, which I landed there because I couldn't have gone to college without financial aid. And so it just felt like a natural step for me, kind of give back and learn the workforce and continue to make my connections with my alma mater. And then, I built an entire personalized one-to-one stewardship for our top level stewardship, or our top level donors at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And then I took over as chief operating officer at Dakota State University back here home at a smaller public institution. So like, again, criminal justice major has no business being your COO of a foundation at 30, but tenacity and yeah, stubbornness and sometimes a lack of work-life balance is what got me there.
Well, we could talk about work-life balance. Nonprofits struggle with that too. So I think
Oh
you're
my gosh.
you're in the same boat. But yeah, so Sami, you build systems that work for humans. It's. I think you coined the term ADHD aesthetic. Is that right?
Yeah, I said, what did I say? I'm a systems girly with an ADHD aesthetic. It really gives you
So
an idea of who you're working with. I don't like, I am a lot. I get it. I love what I am, but I don't want people to walk in thinking they're going to get buttoned up. I will turn it on for your board for sure. But outside of that, like, we're going to have fun because you're all in this to like make change. So the thing for me, Rob, is like I tell people usually I like to help good people do good things. And if you fit that bucket and I can make it work, like most of the time I'm here to help and I want to do it. So big variety though.
no, that's fantastic. So let's talk about systems. I'd be curious to know you're helping organizations develop their systems and their operations. Is there a common like broken development system, and what does it look like before you turn it around for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The common questions one I don't think I've ever been asked before. Now that I hear it, which I'm kind of like, what would my answer to that be? But I think if I could point to a system that I wish this isn't really what you asked, so I'm so sorry, but I guess back to earlier comments about being chaos. Um, I wish more nonprofits took a project management approach and not in the tech sense of project management. I think, I mean, Tim over at the Human Stack has got some good like managed success, sort of like how to make tech an integral part of your system as a whole. But I'm not even referencing that necessarily. I just mean nonprofits are so notorious for just saying yes that we don't have a way to like actually see what we're working on and is it mission aligned at all times and who is making sure that accountabilities are happening and progress is happening on larger projects. Um, and that's been my favorite. Like every time I come in, it always starts with the like, do you have a problem? If you have a problem and you allow me the time to help you define it, we will fix it. Which in the project management world, right, is just requirements gathering. And most of the time they're supposed to come to a project with the idea of what the requirements are. A lot of my work is helping them figure out what is the actual problem statement we're looking at, and then we solution from there. So most of the time, I don't go into any sort of agreement knowing what I'm going to end up working on, which is really hard to do if you're trying to run a business. But I try to, similar for myself though, like if I'm centered on helping good people do good things, if that means I need to be flexible and, able to vary what my offerings are or what they need to get clear on the problem first, like that's the biggest deal. Um, and I've had, yeah, I mean, project management is one that like I've helped implement at an organization that's like one of the fourth largest employers in our state to like a team of 5, right? Like it is useful across the board.
Yeah, I think to that point, fundraisers are so much relationship driven personalities. They love building relationships, and that's why they're great at fundraising. But it oftentimes comes at a detriment of less, a little more chaos, less project management. So I'm curious to know, how do you get a relationship driven person to trust a process without killing those relationship driven instincts that they've got?
Yeah, that's such a fair question. One, you do need to look into having the human stack on this because you two could have some great conversations around the psychology of humans, relationships, and tech. And some of what I do is sort of sprinkled from what they do over at the human stack. But um, one of the biggest things I have to do, and this I learned this mostly as COO because it was one of my best friends that was my CEO. And he said, we are going to make a lot of mistakes, but we're going to trip over money doing it. Like he's the guy that will bring in millions. And he did. But what I had to balance was, I get it. Your job is to bring in the millions. My job is to trip over that and figure out, do we go to the ER or is it just a Band-Aid? And what that forced me to do was that was when I started realizing what we were trying to do as project management. So how do I set up a system that naturally already works in a flow of a fundraiser? So you and I were talking about donor doc and connectivity with our AI tools today. Like if I could just use that as an example. How can I make it as easy as possible for my development officer to get back from a meeting and they're already putting in their notes? If that note is to trigger a gift agreement or a specific something, like an action for somebody else to act on, how do I inherently make that? Like people don't see that as project management. That's exactly what it is. That's the little bit of it. You have to start with those little pieces though, because then what I need is them to trust that if they submit that the way I've asked them to, that gift agreement goes out on time and nearly perfect every time. Once you perfect that, which is like any workflow, whether that's through AI, automation, or just manual system, people to people systems, once you establish that trust with some of those little ones, you have to expand. And then it gets really uncomfortable on both sides because then you're asking your team to rely on the fundraisers a little bit more. And I don't know, how do I say this? Unpopular opinion, but I know that tension goes both ways often, right? And it's not a bad thing. But the idea that like the fundraisers don't understand what we have to do, I knew when I walked into the room that my boss wasn't going to let me say that, regardless. Like, unless we were breaking laws, he was going to be annoying for us because he's like, I have no time to worry about this little thing over here. You're going to have to fix it every time. So then we get to the point where we're establishing full new programs. And this is where I say that larger project management comes in. We're establishing full new programs at a higher ed institution. I mean, talk about bureaucracy. How do I make that so that not only the relational managers trust that they can, within bounds, talk about new programs and know what it takes to pop one up, and our teammates across campus trust that we know we know the playground edges that we're allowed to work in. And that gets, higher ed has that added issue of like, we have to get it okayed by the organization that eventually has to implement this program. But for me, the important piece is those little wins and proving and bringing them to the table, like for some of that post, not post requirements gathering, but like almost the like debrief of like, okay, so we've been doing this gift, this gift agreement process for a while. What holes are there? Do you feel like you have an understanding of where it's at in that process? And you start doing on those things that are really like common and really important to the donors, therefore the fundraisers. You start to get their buy-in, and then the next thing you know, you're building full programs and advocating to the university. And it's not the ops team advocating to the university. It is the fundraisers, the relational people saying, nope, we need this, and I trust my team to help make sure it gets done and gets documented correctly or whatever. It's just those little incremental trusts, which is like such a lame thing to say because there's no easy fix.
And I don't think there's an end to it, right? It's just ongoing relationship and communication between two people that are trying to do the same thing, but from the opposite spectrum of relationship and management. And I think that
Yeah.
is, like you said, it's a healthy tension that's never going to go away. It's just, I love your point of view on like the small wins. Like, how do you continue to like work on the convincing of like, this piece is important. I understand it from a larger perspective, but I'm just going to talk to you about this piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I should also say it's also really important to have leadership buy-in to fail gracefully.
Hmm.
You can't trust each other if you aren't also willing to like hear that you failed, tell your colleague that they failed, and not see that as a bad thing. Like, we are trying to make this process better for all of us, which means it is going to be wrong before it's right. Similar to my boss saying, we're going to trip, but it's going to be over money. He's like, we'll get to that end goal. So I had to be very clear with him when I'm like, hey, I want to implement this tiny little thing that's going to impact gift agreements, but it's going to make it a lot easier. But for the next 2 months, it's going to be a lot harder. And
Sure.
people have to pay a lot more attention to what's going on. But then whoever takes over the foundation in X years isn't looking at 8 different versions of the same gift agreement either. So I should have added that in there because the grace to fail and then the grace to admit failure and the willingness to tell others, hey, I think this process has failed in this spot. Can we talk about it? That is hard to do.
Hmm.
But if you can do that, you will absolutely succeed at any of these. Like, that's 90%. That's where the relational comes in, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's good. And I mean, a little bit, if we get down into the pragmatic pieces of it, we're talking about, and what so many nonprofits struggle with is donor data and the messiness that happens, and institutional knowledge going out the door when the development director moves to a new job and a new one comes in and changes up the system or doesn't put in the same stuff into the system, and you've got project management that's dislocated from or siloed from all of this information, right? That's a
so
lot
true.
for people that, like you and me, that love systems and love to get these processes in place. Um, I'd be curious to know, like, on the very tactical level, what is the smallest cleanup? What is the smallest part that somebody like ourselves can get going with the biggest
Mm.
payoff for their organization?
If fundraisers are our target audience, go in and look at and make sure that the contact information is updated. Super simple. You're using it already. You shouldn't have more than, I think the max is 125, and that's really if you're like a true frontline fundraiser. So hopefully you don't have more than that. But set yourself a little goal to like get through all of them that year. And you don't even need to be the one to update it. Like, I know at some of the institutions I worked at, you weren't allowed to update their data, but you had to submit the updates or whatever. But that helps you. It establishes a little bit of trust with your data teams. And then you're slowly being able to use better data when you're marking, like, I called them. Okay, well, I know when I need to call their, like, emails are a great example. I have like 8 million emails. I specifically want one for my alma mater to have to email me because I look for that in that email inbox. I specifically want this inbox to be for my like work email. You know what I mean? Also my camera is following me, which means when I lean that way, so sorry. um so I would say that because it's the easiest to swallow, right? Like, it's the easiest to implement for a fundraiser who maybe isn't data focused. If you're asking what's probably the most valuable for ops or like just longevity, I would say set yourself like a monthly cleanup of contacts that you've submitted and see. This is where, like, depending on what system you're using or some of that stuff, just see what can be deduced from, like, did this move the needle? Is it clear in that conversation? Or is it clear that there was some actual new material that we would want not just hidden in this contact, but in the database? And setting that monthly also allows you to like just get it in when it happens, which is the biggest barrier. And then saying, okay, each month I'm just going to go back and look and see, does this accurately cover what I need it to cover or what the team needs it to cover? So like those would be the two that I'm like, they feel the easiest and probably have the longest uh life of assist.
Hmm. I love that we're talking about team-based organizations here, but I think
Mm,
oftentimes lean teams often feel like operations are this luxury for big organizations with multiple
fair.
departments, where ops is its own team and fundraisers are their own team. So I'm curious, for those listening that are fundraisers and doing their own data management, what do you say to a fundraising team that feels too busy that they're too busy raising money to fix that back end and the processes and systems?
Yeah. Honestly, my first is AI is your friend. And I know, Rob, you and I were joking a little bit about that before the show, because that's a little bit contentious, but using it responsibly, using it beneficially, that will help you not. The worst thing you could do is start a cleanup and not finish it, because then you're redoing all of that work that you did. Like the half doesn't matter because eventually when you get the time, you'll redo it. Um, What I would say if they were like, SOS, I'm one fundraiser and I don't have time to like clean this up. First is you have to figure out how to make some time because you can't just ignore your systems, or you might as well just get rid of it, right? And keep a spreadsheet at that point. At that point, like figure out a way to keep that more automated update and hope that's enough versus spending the money on a database. That being said, I suggest a database. Let me be very clear. Um, but then figure out, when I'm meeting with a fundraiser like ED, which is often like the groups that I'm working with when it comes to the fundraising side, the first thing I ask is like, what are the reports you're trying to pull and what don't you trust about that report? And then we figure out like, is that an easy fix? Is it just the things that you're naming? Are you using funds as appeal names instead of designations? And what is the story you want this report to tell you? And is it? And if nothing else, the exercise of, okay, I know until I do this thing that requires time, and this is where that project management comes in, you need to be able to show your board, I need this much time to lower the expectation on fundraising so I can increase the accuracy on fundraising. Like you have to be able to make the case for the transition and the trade of that time. You are allowed to trip over money if you have something ready to make sure that that money is in the places that it needs to be. And so using that project management idea of like, here is, we every second quarter, we actually do a stewardship mailer instead of a direct mail specifically. So this, the programming team owns that. It maybe isn't like our tip top marketing work, but it's definitely boots on the ground. And that way the fundraisers spend Q2 looking at the rest of the year and also looking at what are reports that we've got 3 months that we could dedicate some time to data cleanup for or something like that. You know what I mean? It's really hard because I want to give them an answer of like, there's a fix, but it really is like you have to advocate for that time, even if that means telling your board you need it.
So you touched on AI a bit. You're on the advisory council for fundraising at AI.
Mhm.
I'm curious to know what's your take on this. Where is AI genuinely useful for a development team, and where is it just hype? Because there's a lot of hype around AI.
Lots of hype around AI. I will say it's genuinely useful if you find it to be genuinely useful. And I don't mean like interesting, which I am notorious for. I find AI interesting all of the time. um, but if you need to, first and foremost, I want to be very clear. Fundraising AI is an organization dedicated to the responsible and beneficial use of AI in the sector of fundraising, in the sector built for good. Nonprofit has a knack for letting the for-profit community just soar ahead of us because they can do that and we can't. We don't want that to be the case for AI. That being said, there is a difference between using AI to get a gift versus using AI to get a sale. Manipulation in any form, which AI is not well trained to not do, manipulation in any form does undercut the trust that our entire sector is built on, right? And so that's sort of the premise of fundraising AI and what we're trying to do there. And so with all of that, your organization needs to have some directions, right? I like to say policy. I don't care what you have, but you need to know what you're allowed to do and not do. For example, Gemini, if your CRM or all of your donor data is stored in the Google Drive or accessible by your Google Drive in some way, shape, or form, and you're on a nonprofit Google space, Gemini has access to that data whether or not you use it. It is okay to then say, hey, when's the last time I emailed Rob? I know he mentioned something about his cat passing away. I want to make sure, A, that I get that in. So can you help me write the contact report so I can review it? And B, help me brainstorm ways to send him like Rob's a funny guy, and so he wouldn't want just like a condolences type of card. He would want something funny about being sad that his cat died. You know what I mean? Like being able to then use that as a person there, that is an okay use of AI, and there is justification for that saving you time. I don't want people to just hear that and go straight to it though, because if you're not if you're a Google shop or you're a Microsoft shop and you're under those, like you're signed into your organizational profile, you are under those security parameters. And so luckily you are okay. I still I have a personal line. I still don't put kiddo names in, even though I know it's in my drive. I volunteer for a camp for kids with type 1 diabetes. And I still don't love the idea. Like I won't put their names in to Gemini, even if it's technically already like accessible, right? So you can draw your own lines, but I think the hype is when you start using it to write your gift agreements. I want to add an asterisk to everything I say because 5-6 years into using AI, I would use it to do some of this stuff, but I would do it in an automated way that also ensures consistency in formatting, ensures, an agentic check over here. So like I'm saying no to your average user, not necessarily to those like hyper users that are really good with the technical side of it. But I think being willing to explore is not a problem, but don't let AI become your lean on, right? Like don't say, "Hey, what should I do about Rob?" Okay. That's not helpful, right? And it'll probably give you a whole bunch of things. And you risk either it giving you way too many things and you can't act or don't act on any of them, or it's just completely irrelevant because it doesn't have the context. Then you have to question whether or not the context additions are worth it or not. A lot of our CRMs now do have some AI in them. And so where you could possibly use it is, talk to the generative AI, the chatbot in your CRM and say, hey, give me just a quick update on Rob. I want to go meet with him soon. I heard his cat died, and so I want to just have like a quick update. Sorry, apparently you have a cat that just passed. But it's such a good example of like a niche thing that like you don't always include in a contact report, but it does mean a lot to the relational aspect of a donor. And then I might take that summary and depending on the policies, and like I said, I might take all of it minus a name and say, hey, I've got a donor like this. And it should be in something that has context on your organization and your goals and like what your mission is and all of those things. And then just say like, I'm thinking about popping by. I'm struggling with a creative way to, with the humor that this guy and I have, celebrate his cat's life. He doesn't want just your standard this. He would want something funny, but isn't where my brain works. That's a great way to use it. And that's a great way to like alleviate the loneliness that fundraising can be sometimes, right? Like you don't have to know everything. You need to know how to ask it and then how to ask it safely. And then the piece that people lose a lot of though is how to analyze and like choose. I don't mind if you end up using an output of an AI if you've spent the time to get very specific on the requirements of it. But if I just said, hey, I'm about to meet with Rob and his cat just died, what should I say? And I just take that at its face, that's not helpful. And I think that applies to a lot of the documents that we let AI produce for us. That was a really long answer, but
I think there were a lot of good Yeah, there was a lot of good things in there. The one I'm going to pull out though is context. That if you're going to use AI, that it needs to have the correct context, but you also need to be uh, guarded on the context that you give it, because it is going to servers outside of your control. It's data that you want, you don't want sensitive data going into. And I think a lot of CRMs like DonorDoc, we've got AI built in for things like insights. So if you go to a donor profile, it can pull all of the unstructured data like notes and the structured data of all of the activities that have happened and say, hey, this is a paragraph of Rob, so you don't have to go look at
Yes,
his history. And then you use that. We always say automation in AI is an exponent to the human relationship, meaning it's only going to amplify your human relationship. It's never going to replace it. If your human relationship is 0 and you add AI, it's going to be 0. And so I think that's an important piece. I want to call that out of what you're talking about, which is context. So like your CRM, your database is a source of record that you should be utilizing, but it shouldn't be replacing you talking to those donors or those volunteers or your constituents.
absolutely. And that example that you gave is exactly what I'm envisioning. I haven't actually been in a big donor database in a while like this, where I can actually just ask like, "Hey, catch me up on where we're at with Rob," that can take the notes and the activities and all of that stuff and kind of put it in a nice narrative. Like that is such a powerful thing that we have at our disposal.
Yeah,
But then, like
it
you
really
said,
is.
using it appropriately after the fact is so important. But I mean, I can't imagine the damage we could have done all those years with something that simple.
We could talk about AI for a long time. I think it's a hot topic.
For
No matter,
sure.
it's 2026. It wouldn't be anything if we weren't talking about AI, right? But
Exactly.
I'm going to bring this to a close. I always end, Sammy, with what I call the tactical takeaway. This is something very pragmatic that fundraisers can do today to move the needle. So the question is, what is one thing that every fundraiser should do today that you believe matters most?
I hope you're giving me this side eye because I definitely knew you were going to ask me this, and I like wrote down so many answers that I'm like, which one do I want to give? I'm going to go with the process approach. And so just like living with the nerd here today. But I would say write down one thing that lives only in your head, whether it's a process, whether it's a thing about a donor, whether and make that a habit once a week. Like Friday, before you open anything else that day, you're going to write down the one thing that you're like, this thing lives in my head and I'm going to make sure it's written out. Whether it's that Rob's cat died last week or the gift agreement process that I have works really well and here's what it is, right? And you could just have a running tally on your desk, sticky note, here are processes that I could use for my Friday debrief. But I think that's one of the most fundamental. It allows you to pick data points, processes, protocols, little things, but you just commit to one thing out of my brain and into the institution once a week.
But Sammy, thank you so much for giving me your time and joining the conversation today. It was fantastic.
So fun. I'll nerd out anytime with you.
Awesome. For those listening, if you are curious, we talked a lot about automation and databases and data. If you're curious about how DonorDoc can help you find clarity, build these strong relationships, and build retention through what we call smart stewardship, you can visit us at donordoc.com to learn more. And we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.